What's going on, everybody? In this video, I will be responding to your guys' college football hot takes. We haven't done this video in quite a while, so I am excited to do another hot takes video. And the college football season is here, so I figured I would do a hot takes video. But without further ado, let's get into reading some of these hot takes. This first person says Georgia is not the favorite to win the national championship because their schedule is brutal. Well, I would say you are wrong because Georgia is actually the odds-on favorite to win the 2025 national championship right now. But let's pretend like odds don't exist, and this was your opinion, so I'll respect it. But I have to say I disagree with you on this one. Is Georgia going to win the national championship? I don't know. But in my eyes, they should be the favorite. Kirby Smart is one of 3 active head coaches that have won a national championship, and he's won 2. And the other 2 head coaches probably won't even win their conferences this year. Last season, Georgia didn't make the playoffs, but most people can agree that they were a top 4 team last season. They returned 15 starters and one of the top quarterbacks in college football, Carson Beck. They have one of the most talented rosters in college football. I can trust Georgia the most out of any team in college football, and I absolutely think they are the favorite to win the 2025 national championship. This next person says Syracuse goes 10-2 because they have an easy schedule, they don't play Clemson or Florida State, and they get Miami at home. And they also bring Fran Brown, who will change this team in year 1. The ACC is such an interesting conference because there are so many sleeper teams, and Syracuse could be a sleeper team this year. They've really not been talked about a lot this offseason, but they actually got the quarterback from Ohio State, Kyle McCord. He's not a super talented quarterback, but he could get the job done for Syracuse, and I do think he will be a solid addition at quarterback for them. They also have a really good tight end, and they have some solid defensive transfers. I could see a scenario where Syracuse has a tough 2024 season with some of the new faces and a new head coach. But like you said, they have an easy schedule and they are a team to keep an eye on. This next person says Florida State is set up for a very disappointing season. I know it was just one game, but man, they look terrible. DJU threw 0 touchdowns and ran for 7 yards against Georgia Tech, and I'm still not convinced Georgia Tech is that great. He only really threw 2 good passes in that final drive. FSU also got dominated in the trenches. They ran for 98 yards, a majority of which were in the first drive, and they gave up nearly 200 rushing yards. The only guy that was impressive was the kicker, and that should be saying something. Again, Georgia Tech didn't play great either. The defense didn't look amazing, and honestly, Haynes King has played better games. A bowl game is definitely in the cards for the Noles, but honestly, I'd go as far to say the ACC championship and the playoff are done for. I actually picked Georgia Tech to beat Florida State, but I also predicted Florida State would bounce back and win the ACC. Georgia Tech looks like a solid team, but Florida State really lost that game in every single aspect of the game, and a 3-point game doesn't really show how lopsided that game actually was. So I honestly don't think Florida State wins the ACC anymore after watching how terrible that offense looked. Maybe they have a wide receiver 1 emerge, and maybe DJ Uiagalelei starts taking more shots down the field. But I honestly might take Miami over Florida State to win the ACC because I know Cam Ward can ball and that Miami team is incredibly talented. I picked Florida State to lose, but they played even worse than I expected them to do, and Georgia Tech could have easily won that game by 2 possessions. So I am kind of with you on this hot take. It's hard to see this Florida State team making the playoffs. I will be posting my updated playoff bracket this week as a shorter video, and I will not have Florida State in there anymore because I don't know how I could put them in the playoffs after watching them play against Georgia Tech. This next person says Alabama will make the SEC championship game at 11-1, but they lose in the first round of the college football playoff. And that also means Alabama would end their season with back-to-back losses in the SEC championship game and the first round of the playoffs. It's hard to see this Alabama team losing back-to-back games. They are still incredibly talented, and I do think Kalen DeBoer is going to be a winner at Alabama, but it's a new era of Alabama football with Kalen DeBoer, and there's still a lot more we need to learn about this team. Anything is possible with the 12-team playoff, and depending on their first-round matchup, it could be a difficult road for Alabama. This next person says the top 2 wide receivers in college football will both come from the Mountain West, Torrey Horton and Ricky White. Last season, UNLV wide receiver Ricky White was actually 3rd in the nation with receiving yards. The only receivers with more yards than him was Roma Dumze and Malik Neighbors, who were both first-round NFL draft picks last season. UNLV doesn't return star quarterback Jaden Mayava because he transferred to USC, so it will be interesting to see if Ricky White can still put up big numbers without Jaden Mayava at quarterback. And last season, Torrey Horton was 18th in receiving yards, and he returns, and so does Colorado State's quarterback. So there's potential for Torrey Horton to put up big numbers this season. Both of these guys could end up in the top 10 or top 5 in receiving yards when the season is over, and they are definitely 2 guys to watch out for. They could ultimately help lead their team to the Mountain West Championship in 2024. I would go as far to say both Colorado State and UNLV are sleepers to win the Mountain West in 2024. This next person says LSU will go 10-2 but miss the playoffs. And I actually predicted the SEC to have 6 teams win 10 games this season, and the team I had missing the playoffs out of the SEC was Missouri because of the easy schedule. There's so many really good teams in the SEC, so I actually think it makes sense for a 10-2 SEC team with an easier schedule to miss the playoffs, because it's going to be hard to get 6 SEC teams in the college football playoff. I would say 5 is the max, and 6 SEC teams making the playoffs would be a little bit crazy. And LSU has a pretty average schedule compared to the other SEC schools, so if they do go 10-2 and don't impress with that schedule, then there's a slight possibility that they do get left out. This next person says Kansas will make the 12-team playoffs and Jalen Daniels will come close to being a Heisman candidate, and Tulane will be a Group of 5 representative in the college football playoff. And on the topic of Kansas and Jalen Daniels, if Kansas is making the college football playoff this season, then I would absolutely expect Jalen Daniels to be a difference maker for this team, and that probably means he will be top 10 in the Heisman voting. Because I don't think Kansas has the roster without Jalen Daniels to win the Big 12. They have great offensive upside, but they don't even have a stadium, and the front seven is questionable. But if Jalen Daniels stays healthy like some people are expecting, and he puts up big numbers, then I expect a big year from Kansas in 2024. And that could ultimately mean they win the Big 12 and make the playoffs. And on the topic of Tulane, it would not surprise me if Tulane was the G5 representative in the college football playoff, because they did do a great job in the portal and they actually returned 11 starters. This next person says Miami's season will depend on their result against Florida. If they win in the Swamp, they will carry over the momentum and they will have a special season. If they lose, they will be stumped and it will be demoralizing like the Georgia Tech game was, which derailed their season. It's definitely going to be a huge game for Miami and Florida this Saturday. These are two teams with a lot of pressure, but let's not forget what Florida did to Utah in the Swamp a few years back. Florida beat Utah in the Swamp, but Utah actually went on to win the Pac-12 championship. I don't think Miami is going to just completely fall apart if they lose to Florida in a tough environment. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they bounce back in a big way after the loss to Florida. Cam Ward is not a quarterback that stays down, and this Miami team has relied heavily on the portal, but they also return a lot of key guys from last season, and they have a very talented roster coming from high school recruiting. And I really think this is going to be a disciplined and mature Miami team in 2024. And it's big for this team to have leaders like Cam Ward and Damian Martinez offensively who have big-time experience. And I actually think Miami gets it done in the Swamp and beats Florida. I've seen people picking the under 53.5 for this game, including Josh Pate. But really, I would take the over for this game. This game should end up in the high 20s or 30s for sure. I don't understand the pick for under 53.5 for this game. Both these teams' strengths are their offenses, and they both have very experienced quarterbacks. So I really don't see this game going under 53.5, and these offenses should be rolling. I'm excited for this matchup, and this is going to be a huge game for the state of Florida. This is the second hot take I got from this person, and this person says, Georgia's schedule is brutal, and I see them losing to Alabama and Texas on the road, and they could lose to Clemson in Atlanta this upcoming Saturday, especially if they take that game lightly, just like Florida State did this past Saturday against Georgia Tech. Maybe they lose to Alabama and Texas on the road. It's unlikely but possible. But are you really going to try and convince me that Clemson stands a chance against Georgia? I couldn't disagree with you anymore. And Georgia shouldn't even be compared to Florida State. Florida State had that upset coming, and they had no offensive skill position players step up in that game. And you really think a Clemson team that has almost every disadvantage in this game is going to go into Atlanta and upset Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs, who have lost one game in the last 2 seasons? Georgia returns 15 starters and one of the best quarterbacks in college football, Carson Beck. Clemson brought in 0 players from the portal, and they still have a very average quarterback, average offensive line, and unproven wide receivers. Clemson's defense is the only hope they have of covering the spread and keeping this game close. But it's a 4-quarter, 60-minute game, and this game could really get out of hand quickly. Let's read one more hot take for this video, and this last person says Cincinnati goes bowling. Their schedule isn't too rough, and they return good amounts of production, and they should actually have a pretty decent offense that returns 8 starters. They also return a 1,000-yard rusher, and Brendan Sorsby isn't that bad at quarterback. The defense should also be decent with a solid D-line and good linebacker core, and a secondary that revamped in the portal. Scott Satterfield should be given more time. I really have questions with the defense. They did lose 7 starters defensively, and they had one of the worst defenses in the Big 12 last season. I think you are right about them having good offensive upside, Corey Kiner is a very good running back, and Brendan Sorsby should get the job done at quarterback. I just don't think this team is quite there yet. They don't have great depth or talent, and I kind of expect them to be a bottom team in the Big 12 down there with Houston, BYU, and Arizona State. They do have an easy schedule though, and if they manage to beat Pitt early in the season, then I think we can maybe expect a bowl game from them. But they still have to play some solid Big 12 opponents on that schedule, and I just don't see them taking a big step forward in 2024. But anyways, that is going to do it for my hot takes video. Let me remind you guys to like the video and also subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And if you guys love college football, then you will love this channel because we upload a ton of college football content and we basically cover everything on this channel. So definitely consider subscribing and also consider checking out my socials down in the description below. But that is going to do it, guys, and peace out.